I think we are live. I am here with a good friend of mine. This is Carrie, by the way, Full Tilt Friday. Today's subject is going to be culture change. And I'm very fortunate to have with me a close friend, Roberto Blain, who I have known for almost 20, more than 20 years, because you were with me before Indigo. So maybe almost 25 years, actually. And we had a business together that did consulting in human resources and executive search. Roberto has been a friend for
decades.
Yeah, a long time. And I'm in LA and thought that this would be a great chance to talk to him because he has some domain expertise that is unique amongst professional human relations and human resources people. So let me ask you quickly, can you tell me what you are doing right now exactly?
So currently I am principal in a company called Cerulean Leadership, which basically supports organizations in strategic planning, culture change, talent management, and those kinds of things. I'm an adjunct faculty at the Bovard School at the University of Southern California, and I teach human resources in their graduate program. I teach, the subjects I teach are talent management, culture change, and learning and development.
And he and I have had a history as entrepreneurs together, and when I'm in LA, I always try and reach out to him. So today, the idea of culture change came up because it's something that you work with frequently.
And I'm passionate about.
So when you say culture, what is exactly culture?
You know, the colloquial expression is the way we do things around here.
Okay.
But it's really, you know, I like to compare culture to the soil in which the plants grow, and the plants being the people. And so if you fertilize that soil effectively, then you're going to have people who have well-being, performance, satisfaction, and then you're, in turn, we'll have companies that have the same. So culture is really, you know, there's a famous expression that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I think that's true. I think strategy is critically important. I think there are other elements that are important, but culture is really the foundation.
So, and Roberto will talk a lot about the professional side of things. He works with, you also do evaluation within companies, the startup that you're working with as well?
Well, the startup that I'm co-founding with a number of team members is called Z-Lab, and that organization is committed to developing a social media site as well as programs to help people connect with their life mission, their mastery, their personal mastery, and then also connect with like-minded people who are wanting to be in that conversation.
So some of that is the personal side of things, which I will probably talk to a little bit more specifically. So culture change can be something where you literally uproot and go into a different culture simply because you are looking for something different, a different type of experience, a growth experience. I've personally gone through that a couple times, moving from Canada to Mexico and living in Mexico for 3 years, or simply moving into perhaps a different position in a different company. So you will train people at USC who are HR professionals or who are students getting HR degrees. What is in it for an organization who comes to you and says, hey, I want to support culture change in a meaningful way within this organization because fill in the blank. Why would they want to do that? What's the reason behind it if you've got somebody looking to create culture change within a professional environment?
Well, there's a number of reasons. One of them, it's the right thing to do. I mean, you want to create a culture that is, you know, ethical and that provides psychological safety for its employees, and so it's just the right thing to do. The good news is that it also, all the evidence is there, all the studies, all the research, all the empirical evidence for the fact that it definitely is a game changer in terms of performance, organizational performance, return on investment, etc. So there's every reason to do it. And it's really interesting how more CEOs and organizations aren't doing it. That's always surprised me.
Well, I think, speaking personally, you're comfortable in a certain pattern, and that pattern gets you to where you are. But companies and people often want to ascend some sort of growth trajectory. So if you're comfortable and you have that same culture, you're basically creating the circumstances and the environment to support you being exactly where you are and not somewhere else. So culture change for a person or culture change for an organization, like Roberto says, it's the lifeblood. It's, you know, it's insane if a CEO does not want to do some type of culture change, is because that's not getting you to the next level. That's not getting you to another place.
Well, I'm going to argue that it doesn't only just not get you to the same place, but that comfort zone you're in, you will be quickly disrupted from an innovation standpoint, from a people standpoint. So if you're not working on your culture right now, consciously, actively assessing, designing culture that aligns with all the other aspects which we'll talk about, then you are in a position to be quickly disrupted.
AOL is not here anymore.
Well, and yet there are organizations such as IBM who were the front runners, the cutting edge, and then they lost their edge. And companies like Apple, hopscotched over them, but they were smart, and they began to do culture work, assess their culture, realized they had primarily lost their innovative edge, and then they got back in the game.
It's interesting. I've worked with Microsoft a number of times, and Microsoft is in a similar position in that it's a technical dinosaur, but they have proven to be quite agile. They're jumping into spaces like cloud-based computing and subscriptions-based services rather than their old model. You have to adjust. So give me an example of a company that you've worked with where culture change has been implemented successfully. And maybe if you've got one where it hasn't been implemented successfully, that'd be great too. And please answer, I'm going to just make sure that we're streaming properly and then look at, but I'll be right back.
Before we do that, can I talk a little bit about the framework around which culture change operates inside of?
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to give you sort of the macro view, and then we can talk a little bit about the specifics and the experiences. But in an organization, there are a number of different dimensions or elements that are critical. Most organizations are highly focused on strategy, and that's very important. Having a vision, having a mission, having the values articulated, and then they're also focused on talent management. How do you build your, attract, retain, grow your talent. Some are focused on culture, not as many, and then many are focused on leadership development. And the interesting thing is that all of these need to align in order for the organization to have maximum impact and results. And so really it starts with strategy, because you really need to know everything gets built and has to align with the strategy, because at the end of the day, where you're headed, where you're going, where your true north is the thing that leads the way. So what your mission is, what your vision is, what your strategies are, what your tactics are, it starts with that. To that, the culture needs to be aligned. So you have to create a space where people are going to be able to deliver on that, right? And then you have to create your talent management strategy. In other words, how do we, what kind of people do we hire, et cetera, to fit both your culture and your strategy, right? And then the next step is really your leadership development, your people development. You have to, understanding what your culture is and what your strategies are, then you build your leadership development strategy to hire the kind of people and develop the kind of people that can thrive in the culture and execute on the strategy. So those elements are critical to integrate together. The other one that's really important, of course, is technology. And that one has to be also well aligned. And finally, the employment brand. Because a lot of organizations do employment branding work, but oftentimes the brand that they put out doesn't really reflect the culture. It reflects an aspiration that they have. So
there's a lot of terms he's throwing at you all at once. Employment brand, what is that exactly?
Employment brand is the sort of the face the organization puts out with their advertising and their promotion about what it's like to work at the company. What's the culture? What kind of culture do they have? What's their leadership culture? What is their vision? And so that's the employment brand.
So leadership culture, basically how people develop within an organization, what pathway they have forward. Vision is an aspirational statement for an organization, saying essentially often attached to some sort of time horizon. We want to be, our vision for our company is in 6 months we will be in this place.
Right.
And then you have a strategy which gets you there, and then you have a culture that supports that strategy and the talent acquisition that goes along with it so you can grow into that place.
Precisely.
Maybe not precisely, but okay. So you talked about it theoretically. Give me a solid example, a tangible example where this has happened within an organization. So part of Roberto's background, we sort of glossed over it, but when I first met him, he was working at Disney, and shortly after Disney, you came over and worked with me for several years.
Correct.
So you've had a lot of experience. I remember you talking about creating the Dream Team down in South America. I remember you...
With Warner Brothers.
With Warner Brothers, okay. I remember you sharing some of the things that you've done over the last, let's call it decade, working with organizations where you are taking them from one place and bringing to another and doing it through people and culture change. So give us a tangible...
Well, I think Disney Animation was a place that had an empowering culture. It wasn't perfect, as no culture is, but they did their best to create a place where...
Or maybe it's all perfect.
Maybe not. But they did, we did, I was part of a team there, our best to have the staff, the crew, the cast, the artists feel empowered. They didn't always, because it was structured like any other company, but in terms of the perks, in terms of having the games, like a lot of the companies in Silicon Valley have, we had that there. So it wasn't a perfect culture. There were a number of areas, particularly when it came to artist empowerment, for example, that we were working on and could have done a better job. But for the most part, part of the reason why many of those films were highly successful is because of the culture and because of the artists and the talent. And so I've been in organizations where culture work has worked, and I've been in organizations where culture work has not been as effective. And
what happens when it's not effective? How come it's not implemented correctly?
Let me just take a little drink of water and
Please do. Please do. And by the way, those of you who are used to my adventure content, I also do professional development work, as does Roberto. So I'm mixing it up with Full Tilt Friday, but the Full Tilt Friday theme is essentially growth and transformation. And professional development is certainly a big aspect of that. So if it's something a little different than what you're accustomed to hearing, you may just put a different filter in or think about it through a different lens and figure out how it applies.
Or tune out.
You can do that too.
So I want to say a little bit about culture, because culture is more nuanced than most people realize. When most organizations talk about culture, or when most people think about culture, they're usually thinking about one particular frame of culture, which is the whole area of a culture that is people-oriented, that has levers of engagement, it has psychological safety, it has, it empowers people, there's transparency, et cetera, et cetera. And for many years, frankly, that's what I thought was culture. When I started teaching culture, which is why it's been only most recently that I've really developed what I consider to be more of a mastery around culture change. In studying some of the models that around culture, because there's many different models that have been developed by researchers to assess and to design and change culture, I realized it was multidimensional. And so I want to talk in particular about one model, which is the Cameron and Quinn model, which is called the competing values framework. It's a culture change model that's called the competing values framework. And so what Cameron and Quinn did was they did a meta study. They researched many culture models, and they did an analysis to see what are the main themes around culture change, and they came up with four quadrants, if you will. And those quadrants were the people quadrant, right? The hierarchy quadrant, which is the people quadrant is making the place exciting and all the perks and safe and transparent and empowering. Then it's competing value, right? But the tension is the market, which is more of an emphasis on competition, on the marketplace, et cetera, et cetera. This way, because it's four quadrants. This way down here is hierarchy, which is compliance, structure, policies, and its competing value is innovation, right? This one is safe. This one is taking risks. So just to use IBM as an example, a very tangible example of what happened to IBM and why they needed to quickly recalibrate is when IBM was founded, 100 years ago or whenever, they were the cutting edge, right? And they had, market dominance for decades. And they started out being people-oriented, the family, the IBM family. They were market-oriented, they were highly innovative, and when they first got started, they didn't need as much hierarchy because they were fairly new. So one of the things about culture is that it depends on the life cycle of the company and the maturity of the company. So when IBM first got started, they didn't need as many policies, as much hierarchy. As they grew and became successful, the hierarchy quadrant started to grow, and a lot of policies, procedures, compliance, et cetera, and they started losing their innovation edge. So when you analyze culture and look at its quadrants, you come up with something called a kite. And the kite tilted more towards hierarchy. They were still people-oriented, they were still market-oriented, but they lost their innovative edge such that when they did their assessment, they realized, oh my God, we don't have as much innovation as we used to. And so what they did was they actually began to build strategies for innovation to get themselves back in the game. And as a result of that, they got back in the game, and now they're in the game. So I just wanted to share that because when people think of strategy, they think, ooh, great place to work, they empower us, they give us all the treats. But what people need to realize is that it's much more multidimensional than that.
So the quadrant he's talking about in this, and the kite, is basically a shape. So if you imagine these 4 quadrants, and you've got over here innovation, and down here you've got basically systems. So
operations, processes, procedures, etc.
Innovation is a lot of chaos and change,
and creativity,
which is difficult to plan around because you don't know how that's going to work. Down here, you've got process and systems and things, and so these are kind of opposing forces.
Correct.
So when he's saying IBM is asymmetric, instead of having a kite which is shaped, if you just draw a line between each, you'd have a nice, but suddenly you've got a million systems, your kite has this huge long tail, and all of a sudden innovation starts to falter, and then you have young upstarts who come in and take over, and IBM, it used to be that nobody gets in trouble or fired by picking IBM as the vendor. But it got to a point where it's like, that's a dinosaur. They haven't shifted with the times, so they've had to change. So their culture within the organization had to, de facto, shift massively in order for them to stay relevant.
Correct. And, I just want to refine something that you said.
Please.
When you talked about having an even kite, normally that's not necessarily what you want or what is optimal.
Depending on what your industry is.
Depending upon a number of factors, industry being one of them. So if you are in healthcare, where there is a huge amount of compliance, where there's a HIPAA, et cetera, you're going to have a pretty robust hierarchy because you need the compliance, you need the rules, you need the So there's a
certain. It's the same with banking and law and things like that as well.
Correct. But if you're a technology startup in Silicon Valley, you're not as worried about policies and procedures and all those things. Look at Netflix, right? They're very, very sort of. Netflix is an organization that has done its best to grow while still maintaining innovation and minimizing hierarchy as much as possible, right? So the factors that one has to consider when one is designing and building the culture, first assessing, then designing and building it, is what's your maturity cycle? Are you an old growth organization? Have you been around for 100 or 200 years? Like the U.S. Army, it's one of the oldest organizations in the country. And they just went through a whole culture change, which was interesting because they wanted to be more innovative. If you're a startup, your kite, the elements here are going to need to be a bit different than if you're a mature healthcare organization. So industry you're in, maturity of your organization, part of the country that you're in, right? The kind of culture that is required right now in a place like Silicon Valley, with the kinds of people in the incredibly competitive marketplace, is different than what you might find, in a more conservative part of
aerospace or engineering,
right? Conservative industry, in a place where business is more conservative, like in somewhere in the middle of the country, where they don't have that intense pressure to constantly be getting people, and they're competing for some of the toughest markets in the country for technology personnel, HR.
Okay, so let's say you have a company that comes to you, it's a medium-sized company, let's call it 1,000 people, it's been growing, let's put it in biotech because that's kind of a balance. Biotech is innovation, and yet it's also in healthcare.
Yeah.
And they've hit a a wall. They have new management that's come in, maybe they have new funding, something, and they want to take it from 1,000 people and into development to a place where, okay, we got to quadruple the size of the company, we're going to be releasing these products, we're going to be marketing them. What's that culture change look like? How do you tell them this is what should be put into place in order to accommodate this kind of change?
Well, one of the first things that you have to do is assess the culture, right? In order to get from point A to point B, you have to know what your point A is, right? And so I think the Cameron and Quinn model for culture assessment to me is one of the most elegant. There's a discovery process with any kind of engagement, right? Where you want to talk to people at all levels of the organization to find out what's really going on, you have to kind of look under the rocks. And so once you do an assessment of the organization, you get a sense of where the strengths are and where the opportunity, growth areas are. And so once that's done, and my recommendation is that that's done with a team of leaders, but also with a team of individual contributors. Because you might find that the leaders have a different perception from where they sit of how the rank and file employees feel about the organization. And so once you get those two assessments done, you sort of combine them to get an average, sort of a reality check. And now you've got where your culture stands. The next step then is to determine what's our aspirational culture. And there's a process for identifying what are the different areas that you want to improve based on the feedback that you got. And how does your kite need to look? Do we need to push innovation more? Do we need to? And by the way, I think you can create innovation by design.
Sure.
Google is a company that has for years had practices for innovation.
They have a position originally called the Director of Other, and senior engineers and certain people. I don't think they do it as much as they used to, which is a bit of a shame because some of their best products came from it. But it was a mandate that you spend somewhere between 10 and 20% of your time, which equates to roughly a day a week, working on something other than what your primary focus in your job description would be. And some of the most successful products that Google ever came up with were from that forced innovation in some way, but it's like, hey, go and try something out. Gmail came from that. A whole lot of different products. I have to go and look, but that is something you can engineer in if you need to extend your innovation.
Yeah, let me actually, Google was very, very interested in doing very cutting edge work in the area of organizational performance, did a pretty well-known study called the Aristotle Project. And they studied, I think, approximately 150 teams at Google, and they had all this firepower behind these studies, psychologists and statisticians and analysts, and really, so they did it. They had a wired for sound approach to the study, and they had ideas about what was going to. Well, their goal was what makes for a high performance team, what creates a high performance team, and what they found out after doing their correlations and their studies was that there were 5 things, and one of them was that there was a culture of psychological safety, and that was one of the first and foremost. Security, and that people felt like the people on the team had a certain amount of emotional intelligence, that they listened effectively, and that they were empathic. So that was like number 1. Another one was that you could depend on your teammates. There was a sense of high dependability, and that was another very important one.
I've put that under the trust factor.
Got it. And then another one was that there were proper structures around roles and goals, and people knew what the goals were. And another one was that people had an opportunity to share equally. So if 1 or 2 people dominated the conversation on the team, then those teams were not as high performance as teams where people didn't dominate the conversation. So, so clearly you can, by design, create cultures of engagement and innovation.
Just want to make sure we're still on board.
So just to finish what you had asked about, how would you go about it? So once you've created your aspirational culture, there are a set of strategies for each of the quadrants. And depending on whether you want to, do the people quadrant more, you would do these strategies and you would agree on those. And it doesn't mean completely throwing out what you've done before, but what are we going to do more of? What are we going to do less of? What are we going to implement? And then the better part of that story is how you execute upon that, and how you include people in that whole process.
And culture change is not always welcomed with open arms. When you encounter a resistance, what's the
I think,
best method?
well, I think like anything else, I like Cotter's eight reasons change efforts fail. So the 8 reasons they succeed are things like, having a champion, having, communicating constantly with the entire organization, being really transparent about what you're up to, and making the case for, why it's beneficial, and having a plan. There are a number of different things you can do to actually lower the resistance. And I think it's very important to communicate that and to make the case and build the case. And a CEO can do that by expressing to the organization what the intentions are and who doesn't want a better culture.
So I'm going to do a quick translation again over into the personal, again, because a lot of you folks are interested in some of the ultra-length adventures, going out and taking on big projects at different points. And I know I've got a lot of viewers who watch as a enthusiast in endurance sport, and their aspiration is to get from, hey, I've never run more than a half marathon, to I want to do a 100-miler at some point. And in order to get from, hey, I want to do a half marathon, or I've done a half marathon, to I'm going to go do a 100-miler, it is a significant culture change within your personal life, just on how you need to approach it, the way you need to train, essentially. It's interesting when I talk to people who are runners who race things like 10Ks regularly, and maybe they've done a marathon, and then they start to talk about the distance that we go, and I say, you have to completely change your mindset. You have to, rather than thinking, oh, I need to go and really work hard today, I'm going to sweat, I'm going to be 85th percentile effort and above so I can get a good workout in. You can't do that if you're in it for the long haul. So the culture change that then has to happen within your own personal running life is, look, you need to back off the intensity a good bit. Get over your ego, walk the hills. Sometimes you're going to have to be out there during times where it's unpleasant. I went out with my buddy Miles the other day, and it's about 100 degrees in Los Angeles right now in October, which is unseasonably hot. We went on a long run up and down, and we didn't bring enough water. We survived, but it was suffering more than we needed to. So the culture change for me, coming from where I've been running, Wyoming, Vancouver, Colorado, to here was, oh my God, I needed to have a fireman's backpack full of water just to make that shift. People who are running short and then going long, I tell them, look, just back it off, but spend the time out there. You're going to suddenly need to, instead of maybe carrying a bottle in your hand or nothing, you're going to need a pack with you, and that pack is going to have certain things in it. You've got to think about fueling in a different way in order to approach something like that. So a lot of folks have this idea that, oh, are you going to run a 200-mile race? If you're going to run a 200-mile race, people get a little bit disappointed when I say, you don't run the whole thing. You cannot run. There are probably very few people in the world who could run the whole thing, especially with terrain that goes up and down, and literal peaks and valleys. So culture change thinking about for you folks personally, it might be within the organization that you work. Maybe you work at a store, maybe you work in like a manufacturing capacity or something like that. You can begin to put into context what the culture is there. As you said at the beginning, it's how you do things. There's a couple good books about culture and developing culture, and values related to that culture. Values affect how you make decisions. They inform how an organization makes decisions. So values between a biotech startup versus a very established pharmaceutical are going to be quite different. And that kite, the Cameron Quinn kite, is going to look quite different based on how they approach things. So you can begin to be aware of this and figure out how you'd like to shift things. A book that the Zappos book by Tony Say, Delivering Happiness, talks about how they created that culture, which supported a significant growth at a place. What was it you called it?
Holacracy?
It was the employment brand. The employment brand with Zappos was so strong that they would bring somebody in, and if they decided they wanted to hire you, you'd work for 2 weeks, and then they'd offer you like $2,000 or $3,000 to go away. If you don't like this, you should go now, and here's $3,000. No hard feelings. And very infrequently was that taken up on, but they were so confident that their employment brand and their culture was something that was attractive to people. And if you're in an organization where that is attractive, that then shines through. One of their fanatical points was, we are working with customers who are coming in and delivering them service that is unexpected. You are forming a relationship with your customer, you are doing things at a depth that you would normally not encounter in a company like that. It would be more about get the transaction done, pull out what you need from the customer, move on to the next thing. That was not their deal, and they ended up being quite successful at that. I love your dream team story. Your Latin American Warner Brothers dream team story. So I'm going to set it up and then I'm going to hand it over to you. So Roberto's working with Warner Brothers. They need to put together a team in South America. And the brass are talking to Roberto, essentially saying, we need to put a team together, so you need to find some people there who can build a team in Latin America. So can you find some people so they can build a team in Latin America? And Roberto's response was, why do you need a Latin American team? So what happened with that?
No. That's not exactly how it went.
Precisely how.
That's not exactly how it went. So no, what happened with Warner Brothers at the time was that I was an executive recruiter at the time, and they wanted to build. They had a licensing office in South America that was a company that did their licensing for their consumer products division, and they decided, we can do this ourselves. So they teamed me up with the head of Latin America, and the two of us got together and we created a vision for what that team was going to look like. It was an interesting process because we ended up having to interview all of the people who worked for this company.
The thing that I recall about this was you saying to them, well, why do you need someone there to do it? I can do this from here. We can put the team together ourselves.
Oh, you mean the actual recruiting of the people?
Yeah.
They certainly. So
There's one of these notions where...
And the point you're making?
The point you're making is...
The point you're making.
The culture change that had to happen there was this mindset within the brass that said, in order for us to build a team there, someone has to be there building the team. And your response was, well, we don't need to have someone there building a team because I can build it from California without any difficulty. And then you built this team that ended up being this fantastic, legendary team that was referred to as
the dream team. Well, yeah, we actually ended up going down there as well. So
but still,
yeah,
it's you operating from California, coming down, doing a thing, and coming back and putting the team together.
That's right. And so so the point you're making is that there's a mental shift that needs to happen sometimes in cultures, and I think that's completely true, and that's true in many different, including helping CEOs understand why it's so important for them to be doing the culture work.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people, I can't tell you how many people have, I've heard people say, both in human resources and other places, we're not ready for that. It's like, how can you not be ready for that? That's the soil, and, but you're doing a ton of strategy work, and yet that culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so how could you not be ready for that? So that also involves, influencing and persuasion and shifting their mindsets. They think culture is soft, when in fact it's pretty hard.
Within my own business, where we're doing work with, over the last 12 years, I've worked with somewhere between 1,200 and 1,400 different companies, working with teams looking to implement some type of transformation. Sometimes simple team building, sometimes leadership development, sometimes corporate training. And I have an approach or a part of the culture of the organization that I built, which basically says we can sell something or we can sell a product or service without having it fully delivered, created, developed, on the shelf, and ready to go. And if it's sold, then I'm confident we can deliver on what it is. But I don't need to ramp up. I don't need to spend a ton of time developing something, thinking through how it should potentially work or come together. I would much rather sell the product. Okay, we're going to deliver this in 1 month. And then get a contract to deliver it, and then build up to deliver that contract. A partner that I worked with for quite some time was kind of the opposite. They would think, oh, we got to get ramped up, we got to find people in 35 cities who can do all this stuff. We're going to fill a warehouse filled with stuff that we will then use for this type of thing. And to me, that's backwards. We're going to double our office space size so that we can grow. And the culture they're working out of is just, oh, if I have twice the office space, then I will have twice as many people, then I will be able to do twice the amount of business. But I do not think it works like that. I think you have to develop the business and then you basically build the structure or the hierarchy to support that after it's sold. And
you know, I couldn't agree with you more. There's actually a film that speaks to this, which is the film Field of Dreams. And the famous expression is, if you build it, they will come. So, which is why in the area of strategy, you know, one of the things that I've been cutting my teeth on for the last probably 10 years is re-engineering strategy that is much more of a pull than a push. So if you look up strategy in some dictionary, it comes from a Roman term, stratagem, which is, and it's from a military expression from Roman time, you know, from the early Roman times, which is how to get from here to there. And one of the things that a colleague of mine, Mary Campbell, and I came up with as a thought around that, as we are
part of Z Labs.
She's part of Z Lab, is that the old paradigm of strategy is how to get from here to there, whereas the new paradigm, which turns strategy on its head, where now in the foreground is vision, right? Is that in the re-engineered strategy model, it's how to get from there to here.
That's the pull rather than push.
That's the pull rather than the push. Because once you create a very, you know, and I think that what most organizations have as a vision is really not a vision in the sense that I like to think of as a vision, which is a really clearly articulated picture of what the future looks like or could look like, a possibility.
The aspirational aspect.
The aspirational, and that, by the way, has to be co-created with everyone on the team, not just a set of executives who go to the Ritz-Carlton in Santa Monica, do a retreat, and then bring it back, and, you know, because that ends up not being particularly engaging because people aren't, you know, there's a Native American saying that people are committed to an idea to the extent that they participate in its co-creation. So when you do get an entire organization and create a vision for that organization, and by the way, by department as well, this works at the department level as well, then what happens is magic happens.
Which essentially, you have an organization, the umbrella organization, a company that has a articulated vision. And if you're a big company, you've got tens of thousands of people, it's probably not going to be everyone involved, but it may be people from different parts of that organization coming together and creating that vision. But then within those departments, you have perhaps a finance department, and then you've got a marketing department. They're going to have their own visions for those departments. So this works right on down the line, even down to a personal level, where I encourage you to think about what your personal vision is for where you are going, professionally, athletically, socially, financially, and so forth. And if you create that picture of where you're looking to ultimately end up,
new possibilities come from nowhere, new opportunities for action happen, and you step into those opportunities. And so it happens in a different way than if you're very focused on just tactics, doing, really. So it's really about, and by the way, to your point about large organizations not being able to include everybody, when the Mary Campbell that I spoke to you about, when we co-facilitated the strategic planning process for the Norris Cancer Hospital, they included every single employee of the organization. And they did that through town halls, through focus groups, through surveys, etc. So you can include, especially today with the with the tools that are available today, the crowdsourcing tools, you could include everyone in the visioning process. And
I stand but corrected.
Anyway,
It's another culture shift for me to think about it in a different way.
involve everybody in the visioning process, and you'll get more. I think I mentioned it before, but I'll say it again. People are committed to an idea to the extent that they participated in its co-creation.
I've done mission, value, and vision workshops for organizations where it's just the C-suite, which is a little bit exclusive, and then I've done it with a group. The biggest group that I've created a mission statement with is 130 people in one room creating and crafting one statement, and that was the whole company for that particular company. And it was a different process.
Right, and people were excited, weren't they?
Oh yeah.
Visioning gets people excited.
But just as you say, people are committed to the outcome to the extent that they are involved in co-creation of the vision for that outcome. If they understand where, even if they don't agree with every single thing, they've been able to speak their mind and be heard, even if your idea is not adopted.
You have an opportunity, and people appreciate that.
Yeah, feels different.
There's a sense of we're part of this, when in fact, if you don't do it that way, there's a sense of we can't connect to this. This is not.
I worked with a digital company that had, and we were doing similar work, and we had a group from Europe, a large contingency from Europe, and a large contingency from North America. We were meeting in Ontario, and JW Marriott, Muskoka, or something like that, and it came down to whether or not to include as a value love. And one contingency was really clear that is no place for that in professional, and the others were really, really committed to that's a part of this, that's just why we do this, this is part of why we do it. And it ended up being this long...
Who won?
Love. Love ruled the day.
One recommendation that I'll make, and I'll cite an example. So Mary, my business partner, and I did the 10-year strategic planning for American Broadcasting Company, the entertainment division, so ABC Entertainment. And one of the things that we did with them is that we helped them primarily with the vision piece. And so the approach that we took was making sure that the different key result areas included culture as part of it.
Oh, nice.
So it wasn't should we think about that, let's come up with that. We said, this is going to be one of the areas that, they chose other areas, content, obviously, as an entertainment company, technology, operations, and so on, and people, but culture was built in. So a recommendation is, since more organizations are focused on strategic planning than they are on culture work, have culture be one of your planks that you then develop strategies for, and you can do that in many different ways with sub-teams, as work streams, and so on.
Roberto is one of the most informed and passionate people when it comes to this kind of thing that I know, period. Although I have to also recognize you for, he's had a big culture change recently as well. When I lived in LA for 10 years when you were here, I don't know if you ever, maybe once you came and visited us, maybe, because he's kind of the Hollywood Hills.
East side.
Not
even the Hollywood Hills.
And we lived in the west, near the water, and near the ocean. And Roberto just had disdain for even the idea that you would go west of the 405. It was like visiting Antarctica.
As an ex-New Yorker, I didn't travel that, driving long distances. To me, I used to tell you, that's a day trip to go from Silver Lake to Santa Monica to the beach. But I'm doing it more often now.
But now I'm seeing he's going to the beach every now and then. Yes. I'm thinking, that's a possibility.
See, I can change my culture.
I know, it's great. Well, okay. So I'll wrap up for there. That's a little different than our normal one. Once more, the ways that if you want to support the channel and the content, there are a few different ways. Strava is sort of irrelevant, although I'll probably include a link. That's the activities that I go out and do in different places that tracks them. You can follow that if you'd like. I'll probably put a link in the description. You can also follow, do you have an Instagram account? Do you have any social media that people follow?
Not right now, but they'll
to be determined.
developed.
If you send me
I
a thing, I'll throw it into the description. My Instagram is @CarrieWard. You'll have that in the description. You can subscribe if you haven't already. You can thumbs up this video, which would be fantastic and appreciated. Or if you want to go to like the gold level support, there's a Patreon account which will also be in there, and you can give us $1, $2, $20, $100, whatever a month if you would like, and that is also greatly appreciated.
So Carrie, if you were to define the mission of your channel and it's one or two values and its culture, how would you define it?
I like being put on the spot. Okay,
Well,
so
you've been putting me on the spot for
you asked for a few different things. So
the mission.
First thing, the mission. So the mission, it would be, if I was to just come up with an extemporaneous mission statement, it would be to share and to share adventure and real transformational content through interesting people, ideas, and programming to get people, to put people, to basically make a positive influence in people's lives, particularly when it comes to getting uncomfortable and taking things to another level. So in that sense, it is almost a mission of culture change. Values, I'll pick a couple. One is, this will sound a little bit weird, but a willingness to suffer, to be uncomfortable, to experience, to take the chance, to take the risk, and get into a place where you push boundaries. If you're pushing the envelope, if you are growing and developing, you have to be in a place where some type of discomfort or suffering is welcomed and embraced. And the other one that I will mention will be, let's call it a sense of fun, or fun, innovation, creativity. By going out and approaching things in a different way, you often, the value of play and novelty to people's development and their satisfaction, their overall satisfaction with life is undervalued. I think people overrepresent security, and that costs them in their own lives in terms of development.
You know, first of all, two things. One is knowing you as long as I do, that you definitely, you embody everything you just said. You know, he's an adventurer, he's a risk taker, he's creative, he's fun, and so you do that. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
There's a point that you made that I think is really important that we haven't really fleshed out, and I think it's maybe we can close with that.
Okay.
Which is, there was a human capital study around the levers of employee engagement, and there were 300. Nobody can hold that many, right? They were all over the map: compensation and transparency and empowerment and all kinds of things. But can I tell you the number one?
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
Play, fun, innovation.
No. Well, those are definitely levers,
Components.
right? Components. But the number one is that
connection.
That's number two.
Okay. What's number one?
Well, we don't have to really rank them, but one of the most important ones is that you find a way to tap people's innate gifts and talents.
The flow.
Thoreau wrote that most people live lives of quiet desperation and go to their graves with their songs still in them. And being in the field of employment, for example, for as long as I have, I can tell you that this is not a study, but 90% of the population are playing it safe, are in, have golden handcuffs, and aren't really, manifesting and expressing their true gifts and talents. Because our society, because we lack the rites of passage, the initiatory experiences, our society doesn't really set us up to really take the risks and step into that, that the idea that a Native American saying that for every person a purpose. And so I think that one thing that a company and an individual can do is to really work on that. Because when a person is aligned with their purpose and they link their purpose and their livelihood, then that's the brass ring of life.
What's the Japanese term?
The Japanese, there's a Japanese model that's really beautiful. It's called Ikigai, I-K-I-G-A-I, that shows, that framework. It's It's what your gifts and talents are, what you're passionate about, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And in the middle is the ikigai. And I would say that most people have not achieved the ikigai, and that I think more and more people are wanting that. And I'm certainly seeing that younger people, the millennials, and even after those, they're more and more interested in work that's meaningful. By the way, the other Google dimension was for high performance teams is that it was clear that the work was impactful, that the impact that the job made and why and that it had meaning. So this idea about meaning,
The world wants it.
the world wants it, people want it, and it's what really lights people up and what has them do well.
So again, for culture change and relating to what, it's like some of the things you mentioned were, if people are lacking these benchmarks, these cultural milestones, these rites of passage, and some of the things that I do with this channel, some of these huge adventures, a 200-mile race in Australia, that is a rite of passage right there.
Absolutely.
That is something to get through. You come through a journey, you get to the other side, and things have shifted fundamentally. There's actually another tangent, I won't go too far down, but Burning Man has a theme every year. One year it was actually rites of passage and how you go from one thing to another. And that is a absolutely transformational pilgrimage of creativity, innovation. Such an interesting thing to go to. You'd hate it, but it's so great.
What do you mean? I went. I loved it. lot of dust. I had
Tons.
to inhale, and I think I went during the week that was perhaps the windiest and dustiest, and it was challenging, but it was the most creative installation on planet Earth at any given time.
Well, folks, throw any thoughts and comments into.
By the way, a way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn.
Roberto Blain, Blain.
That's right.
And probably you can find it at USC.
At USC as well. But yeah, but LinkedIn's a good place to connect. So connect with me.
All right, folks, this is Kerry signing out. FullTilt. Roberto, man, you're awesome. Thank you so much. All right, we are going to cut this.